second Living with LHON panel moderated by Jessica Knight. Giving you the mic, Jessica. Here we go.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes. All right. So I'm super excited to be able to be moderating the second Living with LHON panel. As some of you remember me from yesterday, this panel really means a lot to me. So it was a big honor when Maria had asked me if I could do this. And of course, I jumped up and down and said yes. And I'm really excited to introduce these wonderful panelists with all of you today. So to start it off, we have Kevin Wright from Tennessee.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm really happy to be joining you today. Thanks for inviting me. I've been a part of our LHON community for approximately 6 years. This is my third conference, and it's something that I look forward to whenever I get a chance to do it. My first one was in Nashville, where I was living at the time of my, when I was diagnosed and affected. But my journey started a long time before that. It actually starts back in Montana. The last time I was in front of a microphone with this many nice people around. Although usually they were outside of the studio I was in, so I didn't have to see all these wonderful faces. It makes it a little bit more intimidating. But thanks for having me today. So I'm an artist and an educator. I grew up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and in 2016, at the end of the year, I moved back to Nashville to start a new career and a new trajectory in life. I was really excited. It took me a little while to find a job in the boomtown that was Nashville in 2016 and 2017, but I found a really great spot in downtown Nashville. I got promoted fairly quickly. I had a lot of experience working in hospitality, restaurants, management, and education. And I became a really valuable asset, so much to the point that I was working extreme hours, 50 to 60 hours a week for an extended period of time, when one morning I noticed that it was really difficult to see the road as I was driving to work. And didn't really think much of it, but then I noticed progressively in the next several days that it became more difficult to see the computer screens that I was working on. And then I couldn't see the flags that we used to identify tables in the rest of the restaurant. I became a little concerned, but I just kept my head down, kept plugging away, didn't think that anything was wrong, until one day when I was driving home, the car in front of me disappeared. And that was the first signal that I needed to do something else to figure out what was going on. So I went to an eye doctor, like many of us. Probably had the most scary left-hand turn of my life into oncoming traffic, and got to the doctor and they said, well, we don't know what's wrong with your eyes, and they sent me home. At which point I realized that it was time for me to stop driving and tell my parents that there was something that was not right, and did they have anything that they knew that it could possibly be. At that time, initially, they didn't know what was wrong with me, but after some discussions with family members, we realized that when I was born, my grandmother couldn't see my face when they took me to go visit her in Minnesota. So that was a really interesting family story that set us on a direction to find a neuro-ophthalmologist, as we learned more and more about what this could possibly be. I was really lucky that the restaurant that I was working at got me into their health insurance program on the back end, and were able to immediately find me a neuro-ophthalmologist at Vanderbilt University. There I was diagnosed within several months. So from having my first symptoms in May of 2017 to then seeing a doctor in June, and then being diagnosed, with the blood work in August, was a really, really fast trajectory to understanding more and more what was going on. In that same time, my family and friends really rallied around me. My dad was on a trip for other reasons, to Virginia, but he learned about the LHON community, and he was able to make that first conference in 2017 part of his adventure and part of our adventure. And he met Lissa for the first time, he met many of you for the first time, and it was a wonderful resource for all of us, myself especially. But it took me a long time to really connect with this community. I had a lot of resentment and anger, frustration, because I didn't really understand what was going on. I was in a new place, a place that I'd barely learned about, but a place I was so excited to explore, and all of a sudden I felt like I had these barriers to my understanding and a barrier to understanding this thing that was going to be a part of my life for the foreseeable future. So I was able to keep my job, mostly because the restaurant was so understaffed that they didn't have anyone else to help manage it. The last thing you really want is a blind man counting the money at the end of the night. But I guess I did that fairly well, maybe not well enough that they didn't close. But when they did close, we were absorbed into a new organization that was going to operate in the same place with many of the same coworkers. And I had a great set of coworkers. They helped me a lot. Taught me how to use Uber, taught me how to use my phone, which is really, it's wild. I learned from a sighted person, these are all the things that I do with VoiceOver. So it's not just folks that have vision impairments that use it. So I had a great relationship with many of them, even though I really became more and more resentful of the job that I had. But I found a way to continue to live in Nashville, to learn how to use the Uber system, and to realize that it was more of a benefit to meet at least 2 new people a day than it was to live a life where you're closed off, not exposed to having a career or the ability to get out and participate in your community. But the next step was really finding the LHON community and the other communities and resources that were out there. So my first chance to attend a conference with LHON was in Nashville. My family came. I met many, many folks that I'm still seeing and getting to interact with now. But it was really hard. My first conference was by far the hardest because it really forced me to accept what was going on in my life and to see and understand and empathize with other people that had either more tough experiences than I did or the same experiences. And oftentimes that's the one that hits the most. When we find that shared connection is when it really hits home. So I remember after that weekend going back to the restaurants, telling all the chefs to put their knives down. I closed the door and I screamed. I screamed for maybe 5 minutes. But it helped. It helped to sort of clear my energy and realize that I need to make the best of this situation the way that people in my community are. And the things that I learned at the conference helped me expand my community as well. I learned about my local NFB. I learned about things like the Blind Institute of Technology, the Computers for the Blind program, and all the different resources that state agencies should be able to help with, like vocational rehabilitation and independent living. So in the following years, I reached out and made those connections, and slowly but surely, I became what I felt like a fully functioning, fully joyful person living in Nashville, meeting at least 2 new people a day, and going out at night, feeling confident in my environment, my safety, and my ability to, find what I wanted out of life again. And then 2020 happened. And the first thing that happened for us in Nashville was we had some major tornadoes come and hit downtown. So the restaurant that I was working at got hit by the tornado, a blessing and a curse, because it gave me a chance to reconnect with family before I was going to be separated with them for a really long time. At which point, I finally got a new desktop computer. I learned Zoom text, and for the next year or so, I began to actually improve my blind skills, as I've heard them called. Increased speed when I'm listening to text and books and different things I need to do for work, as well as really finding a way to claim your story, to be the one that's in charge about how you're defined in your environment, with your community, and who you are and who you want to be. During that time in 2020, I then lost my job with the restaurant. After we fixed the restaurant from the tornado, they'd send us all home the next day and said, oops, guess we didn't plan this right. But then that gave me a chance to meet and improve, first it gave me a chance to then increase my mobility, just finding a way to get around town by myself, because there weren't Ubers to get, didn't want to get in someone else's Uber. And so I had to figure out how I was going to navigate, my local environment. I met a lot of mailboxes, a lot of really, really nice trash cans. It always seemed like they were waving too, so that was great. And as you know, all of us got on Zoom, and so we were able to stay fairly connected during the pandemic together. But eventually I knew that I needed to turn the page and leave Nashville because I didn't know what the next step was going to be in my journey. And I knew that being closer to family in East Tennessee, as well as possibly being next to a university to pursue more academic pursuits, was more likely to be in the cards than not. So I moved back to Tennessee, got reconnected with family, got my own apartment, first time I'd lived by myself, I think maybe ever, because I'd always lived with roommates growing up, lived with my family. College, I had so many amazing roommates and so many bad ones, but there were always other people there. And being on my own gave me a chance to, really find even more independence. Leading on the independent living program has always been amazing. I've gotten so many great resources from them, much more so than through the vocational rehabilitation program, which I think shows me that we need to always be in charge of how we want to present ourselves in the workforce and the things that our goals for our own career development. But through all of these experiences, I've learned that community and finding joy are some of the most important things that we can do together. Finding the resources through the NFB, through LHON, we're finding ways to participate in your local communities. One of the things we did last year was we created a disability advisor board through our city council. And seeing the way that those things can have an impact on other people's lives is really, really meaningful. But it's also meaningful to always find something that gives you joy. For me, that's been music. Then, another year it's been books on the NLS program. Then it's been finding ways to use technology that I didn't know I could. But initially, I really shut the door on all of those opportunities. But it takes a journey to find the strength and the desire and the courage to just keep moving forward. So I'm excited to see where this group goes next, and as well as where life will take me as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And I'm sure we can all relate. And I really admire your perseverance and how, no matter what obstacles got in your way, you still pushed through. So thank you so much for sharing. So our next panelist is going to be Rashell Lewis. And Rashell, if you'd like to take it away.
Hi. I was super surprised that I was even asked to be on the panel because I thought, I don't have a story to tell. And in fact, once she convinced me that I should try this, I sat down and I wrote up a whole thing about both of my sons. And then in the middle of the night, I thought, I think I need to check with Jessica. I don't think I've got this right yet. So she said, no. We want to hear about what happened to you during this whole thing. I thought, well, that's going to be a lot harder. I could talk about the boys, but this is my story. So I'm here with my husband, Cliff, 53 years. So we're about to celebrate number 53, and so that's been a journey. And my oldest son, Chad. I'm the mom of two sons that are both affected. Our youngest son, Jeremy, was affected in 1994 at the age of 16. In fact, I just met another gentleman who was 16, but a lot longer ago. He was really diagnosed quite quickly. We had a great pediatrician who sent him to an ophthalmologist, and then a retina specialist looked at him, and then we had, I think there was only one or two neuro-ophthalmologists in the whole Pacific Northwest at the time, but right there in Portland. And he was amazing because he had just diagnosed a young man about a year earlier who lived in Corvallis that has the same mutation, actually, that we do. And we got to meet him, and those kinds of things, as you know, those connections are wonderful. And he was doing great things in music. And so that gave us a lot of encouragement. But no one in our family, as far back 4 or 5 generations, could we find anyone who had been blind or lost their sight. Even though I didn't know that I carried LHON 14484, I was pretty guilt-ridden. But I remember a really sad day when Jerry told me that he was glad he'd been born even though he lost his sight. So that helped a lot. As I watched my son's eyesight deteriorate, I remember I cried lots and lots of tears. I couldn't read a book that had anything to do with sadness that was difficult. I couldn't sing a song that had the word blind in it. It was just crazy, the things that would sometimes just jump out and get me. I lost 25 pounds pretty quickly. So I finally went to a great psychologist, and she told me that in one of the sessions, she said, "You're really going through grief." And as I kind of began to figure out that I was really grieving the son I'd given birth to, and more about that this was the son I had now that was visually impaired. And once I kind of got that locked into my head, then I began to get, okay, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I'm sad. Cliff was a rock during all that time. He fell apart later, kind of when I got back together. Then it was his turn. But it was really good to kind of get that figured out. And I could really then go back as I kind of got through it and then went, oh, I went through this stage of grief and this stage. So Chad reminded me the other day that during that time, I didn't usually say bad words, but I had a pretty favorite one that I used pretty frequently during that time. And so he said, S-H-I-T. Thanks. So some way that anger, it kind of helped both of my sons, is that because I was mad, it was okay for them to be mad. And so it's an interesting thing how anger kind of comes and grabs you. So anyway, my granddad used to say that when back in my generation, when a lady wanted to be mad or upset, that was the word she used. So I thought it was okay. Granddad said it was okay, so there we go. I was teaching 6th grade about the time all this happened, and it was really kind of a blessing because from 7 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, I didn't have to think about how hard it was for Jeremy or what he was going through at all. When Jeremy was in high school, he had this fabulous hearing and sight coordinator there at the high school who just walked alongside of us. She was great. I would hope all of you would have that if you have a child, that you have that, especially if they're in school, because there's so much for them to figure out. She'd go with us to find computers. She just was basically invited to our son's wedding. She just was really great. Then when Jeremy went to college, he found this fellow that was just amazing that he'd gone to school with that became his roommate, who we now call our third son. He was great for Jeremy. And that helped us as parents, just knowing that there was somebody who could drive him places, who could help him with things. So as a parent, that was just amazing. When our neuro-ophthalmologist had diagnosed Jeremy, they had said, if Chad got to be 25, he'd be fine, because it's a young man's disease, don't worry about it. So when Chad turned 26, we went, whew, we're all good. But that didn't pay off, did it, Chad? So 3 years, and during that time, we really didn't pay attention to LHON. We didn't do any research on it. It just kind of was, we were dealing with his sight, and that was all we did, because it just so much wasn't known at that time. But 3 years and 5 months ago, at age 44, Chad began having vision issues. He was working at a new casino that was built on the I-5 corridor north of Portland, and only about 20 minutes from us. At the time, the casino allowed smoking. It does not now, but at the time. So he worked there as a blackjack dealer. So he was in the smoke 24/7, or 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And we figure that that's what triggered his labors to begin. About 2015, I'd gotten on the LHON website at Jeremy's insistence to kind of he said, Mom, that's your job, is to kind of stay on top of research. And I found this website. So I did that. So when Chad then became affected, I got onto that website, and guess whose name popped up? Lacis. So I think she's a walking encyclopedia of LHON. I'm just sure of it. Of course, encyclopedia also dates me too, so. I asked my two sons if they remembered anything about how I acted during that time. What did they see? And so one of the things Jeremy he first thought of is that I had really noticed him beginning to turn his head every time somebody would talk to him. He was turning it to catch he was trying to figure out who he was talking to. So I really encouraged him to just really focus on looking at the person face to face. And that's made a huge difference in his business now. He also remembers how relentless we were at trying to figure out things that would help him. So he endured vitamin B12 shots from his mother. That was not fun for him or me, but he would just be so strong. He endured acupuncture. We took him to Portland to an acupuncturist, and they gave us this parchment paper filled with all these concoctions of herbs, including rattlesnake skin, that we were supposed to brew up into a tea. It was the awfulest smelling, worst tasting, and that boy just chugged it right down. It was like, I'll try anything. Of course, none of that helped, but he remembered how hard we tried to find something. The day Chad was diagnosed, January 30th, 2018, at the age of 44, he had gone to a retina specialist that he'd been referred to by an optometrist. So we happened to eat at an Applebee's afterwards. We decided after that diagnosis, just from talking to us, the retina specialist said, I'm pretty sure that's what he has. We decided that Applebee's was no longer going to be a restaurant of choice. It was our little way of saying, nope, a bad thing happened when we went to Applebee's, so get this restaurant. Not that you shouldn't, but for us, it's kind of off the charts. It was pretty hard to watch them lose our independence. Watching Chad pretty well decided, kind of like Kevin, that nope, I can't drive anymore. This is too dangerous, too scary. With Jeremy being 16, we literally had to take his keys away and park the car. And that was hard as a parent, I'll tell you. Chad remembered me sitting down, and with the time he came, we had tons of forms to fill out. I mean, I have a whole huge notebook full of forms that Chad would sit at the dining room table, and he would answer all these questions as I filled them out. And then about the time we were ready to fill out the form for SSDI, I went, I just think I can do another one. But we found this great lady in Vancouver who sat down and filled it out for us. It was just like, those little things were just huge to me as a parent. The boys, Chad especially, knew that it was going to be hard to let brother know that he had lost his sight. But the two of them took a trip back to Chicago, and they saw games together, and Jeremy kind of helped him with some of the tricks he had learned, and so that was great. That's just one more thing of a parent going, yes, this is great for one son to help another. Wasn't easier the second time around. It was just different, I think. But we went to the first conference we went to was right after Chad had been diagnosed up in Vancouver, BC. And we got to meet Lissa face to face and met a lot of you people. And some of you remember, I just talked to Patrick, and he remembered meeting us, remembered what Jeremy did for a living. I was just like, but a lot of you who are affected, how wonderful your memory is. And I would just, for me, I can't remember what I had for breakfast, so. We're proud of the boys and all that they've accomplished, and I know you as parents go, wow, this is amazing what they're doing, so and how hard it is. I probably there were times when, during this time that, for both of them, that I've been very much the helicopter mom. You know what that means? I hovered a little too much, suggested a little too often, but they would say, Mom, I can handle this, or I can do it on my own. It was, you know, in fact, I told Patrick, I said, I leave the Zoom meeting for Pacific Northwest to Chad, and I jump on the moms and the Zoom lessons for moms and the sisterhood one. So it kind of gives us a division there, and we can share ideas that way. And I'd really recommend the Zoom meetings. They've been great. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rashell, and your boys are very, very lucky to have you, and thank you for sharing your perspective with all of us today. So our next guest on our panel is going to be John Lacis. He lives in North Carolina, so take it away.
Hi. My mom is Dina Lacis. I'm sure some of you have met her several times. She was diagnosed in middle 2016, and I was affected in summer of 2019, going into my senior year of high school. And luckily, because of us already knowing from my mom, I was able to get a diagnosis really quickly. We were at the beach one day, and I closed my right eye to like rub something out of it, and I was like, huh, that's weird. I can't see like past an arm's length out of my left eye. It was all blurry. And we were walking like to an ice cream shop in, I think it was like downtown, like Surf City. And I mentioned it to her, and she's like, that sounds like LHON. We need to call your doctor. And so a few days after, we had tried to make an appointment with my optometrist. They were full for like 2 weeks. We were like, okay, we'll just go to the doctor on base. He was like, I have no clue what to do. I'm sending you straight upstairs to ophthalmology. We saw Dr. McLaughlin at the Naval Medical Center at Camp Lejeune. He was wonderful. He ran a bunch of different tests. Weirdest feeling one, I will say this every time, is an ultrasound on your eye. That is a very weird feeling. But he had some familiarity with LHON, and because we already knew my mom has it, this is how it presents, he was able to be like, okay, I want you guys to go to Duke as soon as possible. And so we, following day or a couple days later, went to, actually, fun part first. Only my left eye had started to go when we first went. I had my permit. My mom still has her license, technically. She was my licensed driver. So I drove to my appointment half blind, and they dilated my eyes. So we sat in the parking lot of the hospital for almost 2 hours before I'm driving to the PX and getting sunglasses. So that was fun. But then my dad took us up to Duke. We went to the ER, went to their ophthalmology unit. They spent about 2.5 hours shining lights in my eyes and going, we don't know what's wrong. And we went, yeah, we know what's wrong. We need to see neuro-ophthalmology. And then mostly irrelevant, but I got to meet the director of pediatrics. He gave me a popsicle. He was a really nice guy. But it was kind of funny because, like, the nurse who saw me in the ER when we were being discharged seemed more nervous than I was. He was like, "You're like really calm." I was like, "I kind of know what's happening." It didn't make it less scary, but I knew somewhat what to expect. But then we got to Duke's Neuro-Ophthalmology, saw Dr. Eldari, explained everything. They ran a bunch of tests. They did an OT scan of my eye. It's the same lady every time. She's really sweet. I see her once a year. Like the same tech does the OT scans every time. Then we finally had like our meeting with Dr. Eldari, and she put up the pictures of my eye, of my nerve, talked to my dad and everything, and was like, "This is definitely LHON, and we already can assume that because of the mom." And she was like, "I want you to get started on idebnone as soon as possible," and sent my dad some of the websites, showed him that stuff, and we got on that as soon as we were able to. I went to my school. I was like, I had things to change about my schedule anyway, but then I was like, yeah, so this happened. So what's my next step? And me and my mom sat down with my vice principal at the time. We reworked my entire schedule, basically, and we added basically a assistance block for my second semester, and I got in contact with Division of Services for the Blind for the Wilmington area, because they cover Jacksonville, and they worked with the county, and we were able to get accommodation set in place for me. At open house, I explained to all my teachers, I was like, hey, this is a thing that happened. We're working on accommodations, getting that set up. And for the most part, they were just like, okay, just let me know what you need. The fun part, however, is I was taking a drawing and painting class my senior year, and I was just chosen to be the photo editor for our yearbook. And so I had texted my yearbook advisor. I was like, hey, is this gonna become an issue if my right eye goes? And she said, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And she pretty much never addressed it as an issue. We just found new ways to work around it. But at the open house, I had also talked to my art teacher, who I had my sophomore year for beginning art, and she had kind of been able to relate a little bit, because she had started to develop some floaters in her eye. And she was like, if we're doing something where you need to be looking at what you're drawing or painting, just draw what you see. And that is something I have gotten from, I think, almost every art teacher since. Just draw what you see. And she's like, if it changes your style, go with it. My granddad, on my dad's side, was also an artist, and he had macular degeneration. And so I ended up kind of pulling a lot of my inspiration from a lot of his art and a lot of my great-grandfather's art, and that definitely changed my style. I used to be very much like, I want very much to do realism, and then I was like, that's not what I see. So, and I was colorblind before that, before the LHON. So that was a fun part to throw in there. But yeah, we were able to get accommodations set up. I was still able to be a co-photo editor. I took on a little less just for stress reasons, but I was able to, we had a big TV that we would roll in so that I could do my yearbook editing. And we were able to connect that to my laptop, and that was awesome. She was really accommodating. Actually got inducted into the high school's journalism society later that year. And I had, I got to talk a little bit, and my advisor cried. But yeah, and then I graduated in 2020, so COVID happened. But I was able to get a lot of my assistive technology and accommodations before that, and I was able to adjust. And in spring of 2020, or winter, I guess, I had another appointment with Dr. Aldari. She said that my vision had stabilized, basically. She's like, your optic nerve is healing or healed enough to the point where she didn't think it was going to get worse. And she wanted to see me once a year then. Or no, one more appointment after that, she wanted to see me once a year. Art was very much a big thing for me, learning how to cope. Because sensory overload was something that I had started to experience a lot in terms of bright lights and bright colors. And there was this one time I was just in my room, and it was just too much happening. I was just laying in my bed, and I was like, this hurts. And art gives me some control over what I'm perceiving and what I'm making. And it became a way for me to like just better express what I was going through, and also gave me like an avenue to talk to other people about it as well. I had this one project in that art class. It was a redo of a landscape project, or is what I chose to do. And I was like, I want to go big with this because that's easier for me to see. And I used a bunch of different colors of house paint and like bright colors of acrylic paint. And I spent like 2 weeks on it. I just remember one class just staring at it, and I was like, oh my God. Because all of the bright colors that I was using. But to this day, that is the only painting I have actually sold. But that means I'm a successful artist, so. I went to the community college in Jacksonville for a little while. I'm going to be transferring in the fall to East Carolina University to finish up my bachelor's degree in art with a minor in psychology. And I plan on being an art therapist. And I've had a lot of visual improvement. Hopefully I can help other people who are going through the same thing in the same way that art was able to help me. And yeah.
Thank you so much, John. And I love your story, and I love how you used something you love to cope and get through a tough time. And to me, it sounds like you had a strong support system throughout your journey as well. So thank you. So our next panelist is going to be John Coughlin from Florida.
Good morning. My story starts a long time ago. Back in 1965, at the age of 10, my mother gets a phone call from the school nurse telling her that I was completely blind in my right eye. Great call to get, probably a worse call to have to call. And I was totally oblivious. I had no didn't notice that I was blind in my right eye at all. And of course, the first thing my mother goes is, "You're riding your bike to school every day. How could we do that?" But it turned out that after going to the doctor, I had a detached retina in my right eye. I had a fall down the stairs at my parents' house a year or two earlier, and hit like right under my right eye on the doorknob. And the way the doctor explained it then was, your retina can kind of hang by a thread, and then, a sneeze can make it go the rest of the way. So we were sent to the New York Eye and Ear in New York City, where they reattached my retina. And this is all the springtime of 1965 when I was 10. So then, just with the detached retina, you try to keep you, from being too active. So the rest of that school year, I had a tutor that came, and that's how I finished out my fifth grade. And then I still remember over the summer that I was still able to, I got vision back in my right eye. I don't really remember how much vision I had back in my right eye. Sad to say, just you're oblivious, or at least I am, or then I was. But I still remember, reading, the comics in the newspaper and things like that summer. But then when I went for a follow-up checkup in early September that year, that's when they found out that my optic nerves in both eyes were swollen, and I was diagnosed with optic neuritis. And immediately back in the hospital and in New York Eye and Ear, and they started treating me with cortisone and B12 shots 4 times a day, and started doing, various tests to try and, what could cause this, right? So, EEGs, and then that was about 3 weeks in the hospital. They, to no avail, so they referred us to a specialist at New York Hospital, who, put me back in the New York hospital right away and started giving me cortisone and B12 intravenously. And then got a neurologist involved, and had a brain scan, spinal tap, trying to figure out what the root cause might have been, and they never were able to find anything. And I really don't recall if my vision got any better or worse, but I guess the good news is my vision has been really stable since then. So I would, and I have, thankfully, a reasonable amount of functional vision for, our community. But since they didn't know what the cause was, there was concern that my vision could get worse. So I got enrolled in a school for the blind in the Bronx, and was bused into school every day for the remainder of grammar school. So learned how to read Braille, was taught how to type. And that really got, we were pretty analog in 1965, 66. So I learned how to, just use a regular functional typewriter and touch type, which was, probably one of the greater assets that I learned at an early age. Then I went to Catholic high school, and fortunately Catholic Charities had a very good itinerant program. They had 2 nuns that would travel around to different schools in the diocese and be a like a spokesperson, an advocate for you in school, and that really helped a lot to get through high school. The other thing I was going to mention is I don't think I realized it at the time, but my dad was pretty devastated when I first lost my vision, because his exposure to a blind person was someone selling pencils on a street corner in Manhattan. But fortunately, and sorry, I'm just thinking of my dad. I got a tutor in high school for French, because I don't know why I was having particular problems with French, and we got introduced to this lady named Dorothy who was completely blind. She had been a nun, so she'd been a school teacher, so she was tutoring me, but she was completely blind from birth. Her husband was completely blind in his 20s from an accident. But guess what? They had full-time jobs. They commuted on mass transit, and that just showed my dad that there was lots of possibilities, and you could do stuff. I was fairly oblivious, I think, so I don't really ever felt like I was that different at that point, because my parents really went out of their way to make sure that they let me do things. So I still rode a bicycle around my neighborhood. I became a Boy Scout. Fortunately, one of my best friends' dad was the Scoutmaster, and he knew me and was comfortable with what I could do. But they let me swing an axe. They let me start fires. So you go hiking, and yes, I trip over stumps. But other than that, it wasn't too dangerous. Then when I went to college, I really didn't have any accommodations, so you really had to try and learn to advocate for yourself, and I was more interested in having a good time really than being a good student, so I was on like the 5-6 year kind of plan, so and unfortunately wasted some of my parents' money, but I was very fortunate that I guess the other thing to say is, technology is really what's amazing, but like we were really, the things you have today are so much better than what we had when I first got affected. The other thing at this point, I still know nothing about LHON. I mean, I have optic neuritis, I can't see, and you just kind of adapt with what you've been given. Between high school and college, the rehabilitation services in New York sent us to take a course at community college in Queens, but they did all the life skills training. So they taught you how to cook. It's the first time I really had gotten any mobility training in terms of how to use a cane. Although I tend to not use a cane because I'm lazy to carry it around. I got through college, thankfully, by the skin of my teeth, and became very fortunate. And I go for my job interview with the company that ended up hiring me, and the personnel department, because that's what they called them back then. Now they're the people. But she said, "Well, when you get interviewed, but with the hiring manager, don't even." Talk about your vision." So it was interesting. So I ended up getting hired, and then I was working as a data analyst, and so I had to read spreadsheets. I know why they call it a spreadsheet, because it literally is just a piece of paper on a desk. And you had to do things like one person would write a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet and actually do calculations with a calculator, and then the other person would have to check them. So not only did I have to be able to write numbers down, I had to be able to read somebody else's numbers, which was a lot of fun. But I managed to do it, and I guess I did it okay, because I ended up working for the company for 43 years doing lots of different things. The other thing vision related to share was just because so I'm there. I've been an analyst for two and a half years, and one of the client service regional managers calls me into his office and says, "Since we're not considering you for a client service job, we're thinking maybe you'd like to go to our operations office in Florida and use your analytical skills." And I'm like, I had never really thought about necessarily being a client service person, but as soon as you said I can't, I'm like, why not? So it was really pretty funny, because the staff at the time was mostly like 30-year veterans, but there were a couple of folks that were a little bit older than me that kind of just went through the analyst roles and got those jobs, and they all got up in arms. So next thing you know, I'm fighting to become a client service executive, and I guess enough people raised the stink that I became a client service executive, and then I was servicing advertising agencies and networks. I worked for the Nielsen TV ratings. But then, lo and behold, I lived in Manhattan. Lo and behold, my ex-wife and I, we bought a house on Long Island and commuted for about 6 months, and said, this really sucks. And it was about 17 hours on the train. So we ended up moving to Florida. Ironic, right? So I've been very fortunate. The other thing to point out, though, is I moved to Florida in 1988, but my first knowledge of LHON was when my brother, Kevin, went completely blind in 1996. So he went through the usual, journey of trying to find out, what was wrong. Finally got to a neuro-ophthalmologist at Columbia Hospital in New York City and got diagnosed with LHON. And of course, at that point, we didn't really know anything or understand anything. And he was so angry. We found out when we tried to find out what our mutation was. He was so angry, he burnt all the paperwork that he had gotten from the doctor. And at the time, he was an alcoholic. He was, that was his trigger. And he wasn't any less of an alcoholic as he was, initially going through it. But fortunately, not long after that, he found AA, and I think it's like 25 years he hasn't had a drink. So it's he kind of worked through it. But it's interesting because you learn about it. Back then, I remember my sister and I, we would you're trying to find information, and you learn about these studies that were based on 10 people, and you get the generalities. Oh, it doesn't affect women, and all the things other people have talked about. And we kind of just kept trying to learn stuff, and then I think as we learned things, it just became clearer and clearer about the maternal aspects of passing the mutations along. And then I guess somewhere about 7 years ago, I discovered LHON.org and then the Facebook group. So it's just little by little we've been getting involved in the community, doing a lot of the calls. My sister and her two daughters went to the first conference, or at least for part of it, when it was in Alexandria, because her daughter lives in Fairfax. And then we both went to the conference last year, and we're here this year because we just find it, enlightening just to understand. My sister has 2 daughters and 7 grandchildren, and that's really kind of what motivates me to understand and learn. And hopefully, drive some things that might, bring something to help us all in the long term. And that's mostly my story.
Thank you so much, John. You bring a lot of perspective on the advancements in technology with your journey. And I really appreciate how you're here to advocate for others who this may affect in your family. So thank you.
I should have added that we finally found out our mutation, even though I kept, being the procrastinator, and I also worked too much when I was working, but I kept saying, I'm going to go get tested. I'm going to go get tested. Listen knows this because we told her that we were going to do that like many times, and I never did. My sister retired, and she finally got tested, so we know we're 11,778. So it's, at least one of us doesn't procrastinate enough.
So now I believe we do have time for a few questions. So if anybody has questions, get your hands up so our mic runners can see where you're at.
Mom,
Yes.
do you still use the SHIT word?
No.
I was just going to ask John Lacis, did your right eye ever become involved?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. My right eye was affected shortly after my left, but it never worsened to the same extent.
Okay.
And my right eye had improvement a lot quicker.
Mm-hmm.
With my glasses, my right eye is 20/40.
Oh, that's awesome. And what's your mutation?
3460.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm also, sorry, I want to ask questions, but this is. I think I'm okay. I'm also from Florida. This is just very enlightening to me. My son is 13. He's been visually impaired since he was 13. I just found out about LHON about 2 years ago. This is very enlightening to me, so I'm sorry. I've just been sitting back this whole time, being here for 2 days, listening to everybody, and it's just nice to hear the same things that I've been experiencing for 14 years. My son will be 14 in 2 weeks. He was just diagnosed with bilateral optic atrophy for that long. So anyway, forgive me for the emotions, but I was just wondering, I heard about the supplements and everything, and because we just found out about his visual impairment from birth and just left it at that. We were never told of any of that kind of thing. And so I just have 2 questions. One is with the supplements, and has anybody found that that helps at all? And if so, which ones? And then also, my son is going to be turning 14 and is going to be able to work at Publix soon, so he's very excited. And I was just wondering, he was wondering if he should be, telling the employer about his visual impairment when he's interviewing and how that is supposed to work.
John, answer for her.
I currently work at Publix. I got hired right after my left eye had started to worsen. I didn't mention anything about it during my hiring interview because my vision loss at the time felt minimal because I still had a lot of the vision in my right eye. But when I started working, I absolutely made sure to try and advocate for myself when I could. I had a point where I brought my Ruby, my video magnifier, to work, and I was explained to my manager, I was like, hey, this is gonna help me be better and quicker at doing what I'm doing. So I don't know about, a lot of people say as a rule to not mention stuff like that during an interview because, well, yes, it is illegal to fire somebody for that. A lot of employers find a way around it. But he can absolutely get hired. Publix is a very accommodating place. I think he should go for it if it's something that he wants to do. Supplements. I was taking idebnone for a while, and Dr. Aldari thinks that it led to a lot of my improvement in my vision, but that's also, we caught it really quick. And there are other things that can go into it, but I do think the idebnone probably had some effect on my vision improvement. And I also take the CoQ10 every now and then now, although might switch after yesterday's presentations. So, I don't know if you guys want to talk about supplements.
So Chad took idebnone. It did not seem to help him. He took it for 2 years, so I don't know whether others seem to have had some improvement, but Chad did not. It wasn't available for Jeremy. But I'd really encourage, you, as far as our oldest son owns his own financial planning company, and has been very successful. So there's really no limit. He just surrounded himself with tons of good people that help him, and he has just done well. And our son Chad, he started volunteering at the hospital, our local hospital, and now he has a great part-time job there. So there's lots of places that he's going to be successful in tons of ways. So just be encouraged.
Another thing I wanted to add as far as employment, we have a call, and it's wonderful, where those questions are asked, and I believe John said his job's been able to give him accommodations. I think it's good to be up front right away. I've been at the same employer, but I've actually switched positions, and I did let them know, and they have been wonderful to me and given me everything I needed to be successful.
Have any of you noticed with prolonged eye strain and stress, like say on a computer, that you've lost additional eyesight?
My vision's been the same for 58 years, so I don't know. What I find is that it really is that the tools, both in the like magnifiers I use, because they really were pretty crappy back in 1965, but computers and like everything gets easier just because technology is getting so much better. But you do notice strain. I worked on computers all day long in my job, so you do get eye strain and get tired, but it never really I've not found it to affect my vision, at least in my case.
I'd say that it's probably you want to strike a balance of trying to find technology that doesn't strain your eyes all the time. There's times if you have functional eyesight that you want to take advantage of that to be as efficient as you can be at times, but also find ways to let the technology work for you and just reduce the stress on your eyes. It may not have a detrimental effect on them, but we all have that moment where it's like I'm ready to I'm ready to shut down today. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hey everybody, Brian Haas up here in the front. So I just wanted to make a comment. I've probably told some of you guys that I work for the VR agency in Maryland, and I'm a business service representative with them. On the other side of the house, we have doors counselors that help people work through our plan. But within my job, I am a certified ADA trainer. So what I want to tell you guys is requesting reasonable accommodations. You can do that anywhere from the application process, anywhere until you're let go. I would encourage you to, in a work employment situation, request them when you need them. Or beforehand, put it in writing. It's not required to put it in writing. You can ask it verbally or in any way, shape, or form, but it's just rule of thumb, keep it in writing. So I just wanted to point that out just because it was mentioned. But yeah, just, if you have any questions around that, just feel free to ask. But yeah, so it's a law that was passed in 1990, and it's, to protect us in employment and various other aspects. So yeah.
Hello, my name's Tim. I grew up in Portland, Oregon. So I was nervous your word rhymed with the Oregon Ducks instead of, but I would like to know one of your favorite hobbies currently and or a travel story. I guess more interesting, more points.
So my hobbies have changed greatly since being affected, because I used to be more like outgoing, always on the go. My husband called it zooming around. Now more of my hobbies and activities are based at home. So I've been baking a lot. And everybody seems to be enjoying it, so no complaints there. And then we do love to travel. It's my favorite thing to do ever. I love to travel. And recently I have flown, being visually impaired, I don't use a cane, but I did bring it to the airport, and I found that it was very, very helpful to have that with me, because it wasn't just for me, it was for others, to inform them that, hey, she's visually impaired, and we all really enjoyed getting on the plane first, so.
One of the things I really enjoy is going to the gym. One, because I can do so many different things while I'm on the equipment, while I'm going to and from the gym. Most of the time when I'm there, I only mount equipment and not people. And most of the time they're very forgiving when you get a little bit too close. So I always advocate, everybody wear blue when you're at the gym. They'll see you coming at least. And then I also love to go to concerts, love to travel. Like Jessica, having your cane there is a really great tool so that other people are aware. Because I've been in situations where it's hard to negotiate your way out of offending someone, whether you've cut 40 people in line to try to get a beer, or you're trying to catch up with your friends, because if you lose them, then you're lost in a sea of 50,000 people.
I'll just speak to both of my boys. Jeremy loves skiing. He's even done four-wheel driving. He puts his 15-and-a-half-year-old behind him and goes four-wheeling at the beach and that sort of thing. Pierce gives him directions, and they've had a few close calls, but anything is possible, I think. And Chad he rides his bike and does all sorts of different things, so you ought to check with him about his hobbies.
Obviously, art is still a big thing for me. So that obviously is a big one. Concerts, I went to my first concert on my own after my vision was affected, and I have been now to see them 3 different times. They're called the Mountain Goats. They're a folk punk band. They're very awesome. I have seen them in Carborough twice and Wilmington once. But my mom got more into audiobooks. I got more into podcasts. So, yeah.
I had to travel for my job, so I used to fly all over the place just by myself and just kind of be a pain and ask people for help. Never be ashamed to ask somebody for help. And they're always accommodating, so it's not too bad. And I primarily flew back and forth between Tampa and New York, so after a while you just kind of, if you're flying, at one point I was flying at least twice a month back and forth. So you get to know the LaGuardia airport pretty well, so then you just kind of can find your way. But I've also, I went on a cruise by myself, which was interesting. The other interesting story is when I was in my 20s, when I first started working, I went on a trip to Bermuda with 10 other guys, and amazingly, we rented mopeds, and they didn't ask for a license or anything. So it was like because it was through the hotel, the mopeds were just there when we got there. So I was riding around on a moped for a week, but it was not that bad because I was following 10 other guys. So you just kind of follow the pack. But the fun part of that story, which I think I told a couple of folks already here, that the one night when we were out, and our hotel was about 1.5 miles from the disco where we were at, and the disco is really just on the edge of town. So you're really just driving a pretty safe street that there's not a lot of traffic on. I decided to go home on my own because I was tired. And I quickly learned that there's a direct correlation between your speed and the brightness of the headlight. So I'd speed up so I could see, and then I'd get freaked out, and I'd slow down and be in the dark again. So I'm going fast and slow, bright and dark, on the right side of the road, and they drive on the left side of the road. So the guy that's never driven his life is still driving on the right side of the road. And some poor person tries, "Are you okay?" So I did make it home. But that's my fun travel story. And then hobbies. I've always kind of dabbled with playing the guitar for my own amusement and singing, but somewhere in the last 2 years, a friend of mine and I, we've actually been doing open mics, so we go out and embarrass ourselves a little bit and sing a few songs, play some songs. So I spend a lot of my time trying to learn songs, because you don't want to keep singing the same stuff over and over again. But and I don't claim to be great, but I'm never the worst person there.
Well, we're going to wrap it up. We have another session after this. And again, if you have any more questions for the folks up on the panel, please feel free to find them during lunch a little bit later today. But let's give another big applause for these crazy people. And for Jessica, who's moderating her first panel. So she did great. She trained with the best.